Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us. Today we'll be talking about biodiversity and why it is important. But before we get started, I wanted to take the time to tell you who we are. NMEPA, or the North American Marine Environment Protection Association, and our mission is preserving the marine environment by promoting sustainable maritime industry best practices and educating the public to save our seas. So what does all that mean? Simply put, we're a nonprofit composed of educators, scientists, and industry personnel that believes in bringing together all sides to promote marine literacy and educate the public to save our seas. I am Ricky McDaniel, one of the education managers here at NMEPA, and I'm happy to have you join us today. So let's get started. So what is biodiversity? The short definition, the variety of life in the world or within a particular ecosystem. If we break down the word, it might make a little more sense. Bio means living and diversity means different. So what that really is saying is that we're talking about all the living things within an ecosystem. And if you don't know what an ecosystem is, that's okay. Think of something like a coral reef or a rainforest. It would be all the living things that depend on each other within that environment. Remembering that that would also include the plants and the creatures that live in the soil too. So now that we know what biodiversity means, for an ecosystem to be healthy, we need to see a lot of variety. Let's take a look at what can interrupt or change the biodiversity within an ecosystem, specifically how humans are affecting the biodiversity. We will discuss only two ways here, but there are other ways such as nutrient pollution, plastic pollution, and thermal pollution, so I encourage you to do a little more research on any of those. Here we will discuss climate change and deforestation. When we talk about climate change, the climate is changing the habitat and forcing the species to move. And when we talk about deforestation, humans are removing the habitat, which forces species to move. First, let's talk about climate change. Our climate is changing, and it is having an effect or changing the habitats at a fast rate, forcing species to adapt or migrate to new locations or become threatened or endangered. On land, a change of only a few degrees in temperature is not so noticeable, but in the water, a change of only 1 or 2 degrees can kill an entire ecosystem, such as a coral reef, or melt sea ice. So what is changing the temperature? The burning of fossil fuels, vehicle emissions, industry and manufacturing with carbon emissions and runoff are only a few ways that humans are contributing to the changing temperature. Next, we'll watch a video clip on the changing climate. The video will pick up talking about what effect the warming of our atmosphere and oceans will have on our land. What would happen if the oceans rise, and how will this affect the animal populations?
What does this mean for biodiversity, though? Well, in the first place, you're going to lose these low-lying places, and therefore their habitats and the species living in them. Some of these habitats are home to rare and endangered species. Apart from the actual change in sea level, what really is a major problem for biodiversity is the warming itself. Again, remember that every species has its own optimal habitat and tolerance ranges, and that includes all the things that go along with living in the right temperature regime. The IPCC estimates that a 4 degrees Celsius increase, just over 7 degrees Fahrenheit, is going to result in major extinction due to the inability of organisms to adapt to the changes. It's this rate thing again. Organisms can't move to cooler areas fast enough or adapt fast enough. Sure, some migratory animals can change their patterns of migration a bit, but what about the organisms that can't change? What about the ones that can't move? Entire forests come to mind. Think of mountain ranges. Forests will move further up the mountainsides, completely altering or displacing entire ecosystems as they go. And we've got really interesting examples from some of our own investigators here at the Academy, people like Dave Kavanaugh, who studies endemic beetles specialized to live in the icy areas high on mountains. These colder places are disappearing. The beetles are moving to higher and higher elevations, but pretty soon they're going to run out of mountain. Even marine ecosystems are not immune. A 2 degrees Celsius increase in the ocean, about 3.5 degrees Fahrenheit, Doesn't sound like that much, but it's a lot because we're talking about a huge amount of extra heat over the entire huge size of the ocean. And we've been talking about an average number. Some places are going to be warmer than that. Some are going to be cooler, but an overall 2 degrees Celsius increase is enough to result in major coral reef die-offs. Reefs just can't respond to these rapid temperature changes fast enough, nor move to other places, even assuming that other suitable habitat was available.
Wow, that's a lot of information on temperature change. So let's think about temperature rise that they mentioned in the video, 2 to 5 degrees. Doesn't sound like much to me. But how do you feel when you have a fever? Even a 3-degree change in your body temperature would make your temperature around 101 degrees, and that can make us humans feel really bad. So as mentioned in the video, all species have a specific habitat and temperature in which they thrive. Changing these habitats by only a few degrees can have a significant impact. Some species will be able to move to a new location, but some species will die out and become extinct. Deforestation and biodiversity. Let's talk about deforestation. When we cut or chop down a forest, we are displacing the animals that live in or nest in the trees. We're exposing the ground below, letting in more sunlight. There's less root structure, so the animals that used to live there and in the shrubs under the trees are now displaced too. We've also created a problem with water and rainwater. When it rains, the canopy or tops of the trees used to act like umbrellas, blocking massive amounts of rain from hitting the ground all at one place. What did hit the ground was used up by the roots of the tree. Now that the trees are gone, much more water is hitting the ground at a faster rate, not getting soaked up by the roots because the roots are no longer there, and this creates floods and washing away of the land and erosion. We no longer have the birds nesting in the area, eating the berries and worms. The snakes have dispersed. The deer that used to hide under the cover of the trees are now moved to another location, which would make that new location more crowded. So let's watch the video and see what they have to say.
Together, forestry and agriculture are responsible for 24% of greenhouse gas emissions, making deforestation a significant contributor to climate change. Deforestation impacts the amount of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere in 2 ways. First, when trees are felled, they release the carbon they are storing into the atmosphere. Second, trees play a critical role in absorbing the greenhouse gases that fuel global warming. Fewer forests mean larger amounts of greenhouse gases entering the atmosphere, and increased speed and severity of global warming. In addition to helping regulate the Earth's climate, forests provide habitats for over 80% of the plants and animals that live on land. But deforestation destroys these habitats, diminishing biodiversity. Some estimate that 4,000 to 6,000 rainforest species go extinct each year.
Wow, I didn't realize that our forests store so much carbon dioxide. But when we chop down those trees, we release that carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere, which is adding to the increased temperature of our climate. Cutting down these trees, as we saw in the previous slide and in this video, decreases the biodiversity. As mentioned in the video, she said up to 80% of the land-dwelling species can be gone. Agriculture, such as farming, is the biggest driver of deforestation in urban areas. So combating deforestation or controlling how much we cut down can help us further prevent the loss of biodiversity. So what can we do to reduce the loss of biodiversity and stop changing the climate? We can become aware and educate ourselves. We can reduce our carbon footprint. We can reduce pollution. We can have sustainable agricultural practices such as reduce the amount of forest that we cut down or rotate our plants and crops. We can practice ecologically friendly agriculture, meaning no pesticides and chemicals. You may not be the one chopping the forest or driving the car, but you can have an impact even at an early age. Walk or ride your bike. Reuse items so that you do not need to purchase more. Young and old can make responsible decisions. I hope you enjoyed learning about biodiversity and have learned how important it is. Remember that biodiversity just means the variety of all living things that live together, and they all depend on one another in some way.